Thank you, Mr President. My question is to the Minister for Primary Industries, the Honourable Niall Blair. As Minister responsible for animal welfare, what is your response to the Sydney Morning Herald article of the 7th of November, which estimates that in 2017, under your watch, 10 million native animals died directly as a result of habitat destruction due to land clearing allowed under the government's changes to the native vegetation protection laws? In particular, how do you manage the conflict of interest between your department's support for land clearing for agriculture and your responsibilities under the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act to prevent animal suffering? Thank you.
Mr President, I thank the honourable member for his question, and I would first of all start by saying we would like to see some more information and from evidence to justify that claim of those numbers of species. What they've done in this latest report, they've taken two different or a couple of reports, come up with their own methodology about a square area size, and then applied that to come out with this incredible number of animals that they claim have lost their lives as a result of the removal of native vegetation. So firstly, I would like to see more information to justify that claim. But secondly, you refer to the conflict of interest that we have in relation to land clearing. But one thing that again, a lot of people on that side of the chamber, on the crossbench and the opposition, fail to recognise is the habitat that is, one, enhanced, or two, restored under our new biodiversity changes that we put through this state. Not acknowledging at all the fact that in a lot of cases, the largest numbers of approvals that we are seeing relate to invasive native species. And I asked the member, have you ever stood in a monoculture forest of invasive native species and not heard a bird, not seen a single piece of ground cover, not seen any biodiversity in those areas? And these are a large number of the approvals that have been given under our changes. And not one acknowledgement of the trees that have been planted, the sensitive areas that have been set aside, but more importantly set aside and managed, not locked up and allowed to fester with feral animals and noxious weeds, which in themselves are one of the largest threats to our native animals in this state, Mr President. So I'm not going to acknowledge the premise of your question that there is a conflict of interest. I would actually say that in large part, a lot of the habitat that is being restored, a lot of the set-asides that are being managed, a lot of the invasive native species that are actually being managed and controlled, and a lot of the feral weeds and the feral animals that are being managed are doing more for our biodiversity of this state than what we've seen on some of the previous ways of managing land in this state. So I dismiss, firstly, the numbers in relation to the loss of those native species. I dismiss the fact that what we put through was just about land clearing. It's one part to cherry pick out of a policy and not acknowledge the other parts, especially the hundreds of millions of dollars for saving our species that also went through with our changes to legislation. So I'm not going to accept, firstly, there is a conflict, and I'm not going to accept the premise of the question, and I would like those opposite and on the crossbench to start acknowledging some of the other aspects of this change in the way that we manage biodiversity in this state. We know that the previous way wasn't working. That's when those opposites start quoting the numbers of species that have gone onto the threatened list. That was all under the legislation and the changes that they put through. The native vegetation laws in this state weren't working, particularly for our native species. So to continue to do the same thing over and over and over and expect a different result is a definition of insanity. That's why we brought a balanced change into this area, and that's why we will see an increase in biodiversity in this state as a result of those changes.